Chosen chapters from the Velvet Paw of Asquith novels, also known as the Duvin books, by Thomas Caulfield. Read by the author. About the books. Consider a world inhabited with only cats and dogs. A society recognisable as our own, but with its eccentricities being the norm rather than the exception. A world where the charm of Kenneth Grahame's Wind in the Willows meets the exotic world of Ian Fleming's Bond. A world where Fluffy just got dangerous. These are the Velvet Paw of Asquith novels, also known as the Duvin books. Welcome to the genre of new fable. The books follow Oscar Teabag Duvin, a secret agent who believes he's more a poet than a spy, in a series of international jet-setting adventures involving greed, espionage, and the odd foray into professional cheese shaping. Unfolding with a gratuitousness only possible in a world unrestrained by conventional society, the Velvet Paw of Asquith novels are a bubbling cauldron of mystery, adventure, and romance, sautéed with intrigue, glazed with irreverence, and garnished with sprigs of absurdism. They taste revolting. Despite finding training to be brash and clinical with too much shouting and not enough singing, Oscar battles villains and tries thwarting their garish plans. But it isn't easy when unable to do much more than rhyme one lot of words with another. Nevertheless, he succeeds with the help of the animals he meets and the courage that arises the moment he believes it cannot. Chapter 1, from The World is Badly Made, Chapter 19, in which we meet Frabgnl Frin-Splummet, an impassioned funeral director who has a novel approach to his profession. Most animals would not consider a career as an undertaker. Frabgnl Frin-Splummet, however, found being an undertaker a most satisfying profession. This was fortunate because his father had been an undertaker, as had his father's father, and an awful lot of fathers before them. Indeed, no closer could a family become than when they end up burying each other. Frabgnl Frin-Splummet was a small, round dog who wore a waistcoat, a dark velvet blazer, and a big bow tie. The bow tie was standard size, but relative to his stature, appeared larger. The same could be said of his funeral parlour, which was a narrow building off a high street. Being 2 stories high, but 5 stories deep, it was an unusual design were it not in par beguine. The city had risen and fallen so often beneath the horror of Bedlam that much of its rising was done while it was still falling, which resulted in some very deep basements indeed. Like the Frin-Splummets before him, Frabgnl took great pride in carting expired animals into his basement where he prepared them for burial. So many corpses had passed through it over the centuries that he wondered whether there was some languishing in it that had been forgotten about. Beneath Bedlam, the funeral business had thrived. In his profession, the bad times are much better than the good. Recent times, however, have been particularly good, which meant the parlour wasn't nearly as busy as it had been a millennium ago. Indeed, when Frabgnl took over from his father, it became apparent that he'd have to whittle its staff from 5 animals to 2. This, he'd explained over their wails of despair, wasn't unreasonable considering their efforts revolved around dragging dead animals down staircases. His staff had been adamant that it involved much more than mere dragging. The corpses often needed hosing down, for example, and then hauled back upstairs, shoved into wheelbarrows, pushed across the city and dumped into holes. His reasons for whittling staff went beyond corpse manoeuvring, however. After burying his father, he'd called a meeting to advise them why. "I'm sorry," he'd said, dusting his paws that were still covered in soil, "but I'm afraid there have to be some changes now that I'm in charge." "You're not thinking of expanding, are you?" a staff member asked. "No, quite the opposite, actually. I'm considering streamlining the business, making it more efficient. Father's approach, understandably perhaps, was rather old-fashioned." "Well, it's hard not to be. Chucking dead animals in holes hasn't changed much over the years. No, that's not what... They're either dead or they're not. If they are, we chuck them in holes. If they're not, we don't. It's quite easy. There's a flow chart in the office. There was a murmur of agreement from the others. I know what the business involves, Frabgnl said. It's been in my family for years. What I'm saying is it needs to be made more efficient. You've all served the parlour very well. Indeed, I think we've buried most of your families. Yes, another grumbled. You needn't remind us. My mother still can't sleep with the covers on. Frabgnl cleared his throat. I'm sorry about that. I honestly thought she was dead. I was young and keen, you see. Even when she started yelling that she wasn't. I told you, I thought it was rigor mortis. Rigor mortis doesn't involve the corpse yelling that it's not dead, Frabgnl. Yes, I know that now, especially after Father put up the flowcharts. Anyway, the point is that my father's approach was old-fashioned, and changes need to be made. What sort of changes? Well, primarily, letting 3 of you go. Letting 3 of us go? They looked at each other. Letting us go where? Well, away from here. From Frabgnl? We can't leave Frabgnl. It's our home. Who will look after my mother? She certainly won't want it to be you. I don't mean leaving the city, Frabgnl said. I mean leaving the business, leaving Frin-Splummet funeral parlour. I'm sorry, but 3 of you will no longer have a job here. I can write you excellent references. Some of your holes have been brilliant. All 5 stared. I'm sorry, he said. I don't like doing this, but you have to understand that things have changed. But in what way? Another cried. Animals die, we chuck them in holes. There's not much room for variation. I mean, they're dying now, somewhere. Out there, animals are snuffing it. He pointed at a telephone. Every time that thing rings, I get a little shiver of joy at the thought of some animal having carked it. There were murmurs again. Frabgnl sighed. He didn't want to let them go. He liked them, but he was running a business, and if he didn't make changes, there wouldn't be a business left to run. Believe me, he said, I really am sorry, but the fact is that things have changed. Yes, but in what way, Frabgnl? Part of him wondered whether a flowchart might help. The truth is that arabesque is wonderful, he said. Thanks to the tiers, times are very good indeed. Animals might be dying, yes, but not enough of them to keep Frin-Splummet funeral parlour viable. It seems my father has been running the place on debt for the past several years. Debt? Their faces fell with a sagginess of grief. Yes, you have to remember that in the past, when times were bad, business boomed. After all, funerals were immensely popular here once upon a time. Nowadays, however, with peace and prosperity across the land, there just aren't enough corpses to put food on the table. What about if we killed some animals on purpose? We've talked about this before, Frabgnl said. We have to let them die naturally. Killing animals so we can bury them just isn't a viable alternative. That's right, another agreed. And anyway, there's no guarantee that they'll call this parlour to bury them. Frabgnl's got more funeral parlours than any other city, thanks to our history of Bedlam. The odds that we'll be called to shove them in a hole are slim. Yeah, but after I kill them, I'd staple our business card to their faces. Yes, said Frabgnl. I believe we've discussed this also. And to be quite honest, it's one of the reasons behind my determining who I let go. All 5 stared at him. Moreover, he said, most of the competition now have long cars that they can stick dead animals in, sometimes 3 at a time, depending on how long they've been dead. They look far more classy than our wheelbarrow and don't fall out as often. Frankly, we need a hearse if this business is to remain viable. And I don't mean repainting the wheelbarrow. Running a car is terribly expensive, and coupled with my father's debt, I have no alternative but to reduce staff. I'm sorry. Really, I am. You've all been terribly loyal. Well, one sighed. In a way, I'm relieved. I'm starting to gag at the smell. Gag? Yeah, the basement's getting dreadfully whiffy. Perhaps not surprising considering the number of corpses that have passed through it. But it wouldn't surprise me if there's 1 or 2 still down there that we've forgotten about. But it's dark, so I can't be sure. Frabgnl stared at him. Are you certain? Oh yes, the bulb's been blown for ages. No, I mean about a corpse still being down there. The animal shrugged. Well, either that or the place needs a good hosing out. Frabgnl frowned. "We can't have left one down there, surely. If we got a new bulb, I could check." "All right, but only a small one, mind. I don't want to blow the budget, primarily because I don't yet have one." Frin-Splummet Funeral Parlour was one of the oldest funeral parlours in Frabgnl, and centuries of excellent service had built a sterling reputation. But good times, debt, and a need for a long car left Frabgnl with little option but to try and run the place virtually by himself. Which is why he paced the pavement outside his parlour, muttering, "Where are they? Where are they?" It was early morning, and he waited for his remaining staff, a dog and a cat, to arrive and help him with the dragging. "Come on," he said, looking at his watch. "Where are they?" Frabgnl was both prone to worrying and a perfectionist, which not only left him worrying about being a perfectionist, but worrying that he wasn't worrying enough. Such traits weren't helped by an incident he'd witnessed when his father ran the place. The parlour was arranging the burial of a dog. The animal was not only dead, but had lived its entire life as a dog. So when its family came to view their dearly departed and saw instead a cat, questions were not only raised, but hurled with the sort of viciousness that required Frin-Splummet's services in the first place. It was a dreadful mix-up. Despite his father's attempts at consoling them by pointing out that they were all going to end up cold and sloppy anyway, it was an incident that had haunted Frabgnl ever since. It left him determined to ensure no such embarrassment occurred again, which was why he paced, looked at his watch, and wondered where they were. Frin-Splummet Funeral Parlour had a loyal following. Generations of families who'd been buried by the Frin-Splummets had no intention of seeking services elsewhere, and Frabgnl prided himself on maintaining such reputation. Recently, he'd had a new gold-lettered sign made, which sat above the parlour's door. It read, "Frin-Splummet Funeral Parlour, let our family bury yours." He stopped pacing and peered up at it, wondering whether he should buff it again. He'd buffed it yesterday, but giving it another going over might stop him worrying about where his hearse had got to. It meant getting his ladder, so he resumed pacing instead. Where are they? He had to shift a dead dog from the basement to a cemetery by 10. Although it was not yet 7, the hearse should have arrived half an hour ago. Were he in the wedding business, he mightn't worry so much, as there's always the option of brides catching taxis. In the funeral business, however, corpses aren't so readily accepted, and leaning a dead dog against a taxi while fiddling for loose change is unlikely to have drivers oblige. With paws on hips, he glowered down the lane and cursed. He couldn't even use the wheelbarrow, as he'd sold it to buy the hearse. A cold, dark mauve pressed the sky into morning. A chill awoke from stone and rose in wisps to get on with whatever chill got on with during the day. On the high road, a rumbling of morning traffic grew as residents got on with whatever they got on with also, and Frabgnl wished his staff would follow these excellent examples. Above the lane's narrow stories, the hendril spires of Urf and Valahar, the inverted cathedral, stood black against the purple sky. The spires towered of Frabgnl as a reminder of what Arabesque had once endured. "Do not look at it so fearfully, Frabgnl," his father had once said. "The cathedral's darkness symbolises light and was built to celebrate the end of Bedlam." "But it's big and scary, father, and only reminds me of such woe." "Of course it does. It's impossible to rejoice in what we have if not reminded by what was once endured." There was a toot from down the lane. With relieved mutterings, Frabgnl watched the battered hearse arrived, a reassuring paw waving from it. With a bump, a scrape and a pop of smoke, the old bomb rattled up to the parlour and squeaked to a halt. While Frabgnl nodded with pride, his 2 employees alighted. "Marvellous what a well-painted wheelbarrow can get you these days," he said, running a paw along a rust-blistered fender. I'd be careful about doing that," the cat said. "It rained last week and significantly weakened that bit." "Nonsense! This is a marvellous piece of automotive engineering, and proves the Frin-Splummet Funeral Parlour is on par with any parlour in Frabgnl." He peered at it. Is there a bit missing here?" "Yes," the dog said. "We were idling at some traffic lights and a bit fell off." "At traffic lights? What happened?" "We were idling." As I mentioned, the cat said, it rained last week, so a lot of the bodywork is compromised. Compromised? Yes, it appears to have been restored once with cardboard and sticky tape, before being coloured in with pencils. Frabgnl smiled at the rattling wreck. Nevertheless, it's a hearse. More importantly, it's Frin-Splummet funeral parlour's hearse. The cat looked at the dog. Let's just hope we don't have any funerals in the rain. Frabgnl glared at them. I did my best, all right. All I had left were debts and a wheelbarrow. At least a wheelbarrow's waterproof. Well, I think it's marvellous, Frabgnl said. Shouldn't you turn the engine off? It will take some time for us to cart the animal up from the basement. Best not to, the dog said. Leaving the engine running increases the odds we'll be able to drive this pile of junk away afterwards. That's right, the cat said. In fact, we haven't dared turn the thing off since last Thursday. Last Thursday? Yes, you remember, when we couldn't start it at the cemetery after we'd buried that cat, which we were forced to dig up again after everyone had left and use it to chop the wheels while we pushed this thing uphill. Oh yes, I'd forgotten about that. Well, we haven't. There's still bits of it stuck to the hubcap. At least we've got hubcaps. Frabgnl, we have one hubcap. Yes, but the wheelbarrow had none at all. He admired the hearse again. I think it's marvellous. I wonder what Father would say if he could see what Frin-Splummet funeral parlour now has in its arsenal. Well, the dog said, arsenal's probably an appropriate word considering the thing's a death trap. Exactly, Frabgnl said with a delighted clap of paws. And what could be more appropriate for a hearse? The hearse was long, the lane narrow, and the dead animal in the basement heavy. As a result, the vehicle needed manoeuvring to a more convenient angle. The dog got back in and crunched through a gear, singular, as it only had one left, and swung the thing around about as daintily as a half-gutted chicken in a beauty salon. With the rear positioned closer to the parlour's door, the dog alighted and chopped its wheel with the hubcap, which had fallen off during the manoeuvre. Frabgnl led them inside, through an office and down a narrow flight of stairs to a depth of cellar 5 stories lower. When they emerged some time later, they struggled beneath a large, heavy dog, which they intended putting to rest in a cemetery, something of an irony considering how relaxed it was already. On the pavement, Frabgnl dropped his end, mopped his brow, and issued some instructions, which had his staff heave the corpse into the back of the hearse before collapsing against its side. Beneath Frabgnl's growing impatience, they dragged themselves along its flank, unchocked its wheel, and clambered into its confines. Satisfied, Frabgnl did the same, squeezing in beside the dead dog and feeling to be chauffeured in the most disturbing manner imaginable. A gear was found, not the one wanted, but because choice was limited they made do, and the hearse grumbled off the curb. With engine coughing in a manner akin to the heavy dog shortly before expiration, it rattled away, leaving a trail of oil behind lest they got lost and needed to find their way back again.